The year is 2018. Disney has a streaming service coming out and they need a high quality show to launch with it so that people will feel incentivized to subscribe. Enter Jon Favreau. In the midst of the sequel trilogy and the controversy that had consumed the Star Wars community, one man had an idea that, if done right, could single-handedly revive the fandom. During production on the remake of The Lion King, Favreau went to Disney and Lucasfilm with an idea. Take the virtual production technology used to create that movie and turn it into a real-world stagecraft set that has the potential to bring movie-level effects to the small screen. And what was his pitch to go along with this revolutionary idea? The first ever live-action Star Wars television series. This was the perfect idea. Disney would have a high-profile show to launch their streaming platform with, and it would completely revolutionize how television could be produced. And from there, The Mandalorian was born. Construction on the Volume, as it would come to be called, was a massive endeavor involving teams specializing in films and video games. While Industrial Light and Magic was the main powerhouse behind its invention, notable contributors included Epic Games, who supplied the Unreal Engine software that allowed for real-time rendering, various computer and film companies like Nvidia and Ari, and creatives like Jon Favreau, obviously, and cinematographer Greg Fraser, who had used a primitive version of this tech for Rogue One and would go on to be the lead cinematographer for the first season of the show to get it up and running. The show itself came from the mind of Jon Favreau. It was a passion project of his, and it was a full-circle moment for him. Favreau's love of The Mandalorians goes all the way back to the Clone Wars, where George Lucas and Dave Filoni created the character of Pre Vizsla and Jon Favreau voiced him. Now he was getting to helm a show all about a Mandalorian. Former Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy paired Favreau up with Lucasfilm veteran Dave Filoni, the man who helped bring us the Clone Wars and Rebels, and gave them a task. Make a good show. Jon Favreau, who had never worked on television, got some tips from Dave Filoni, and Filoni, who had never worked on live action, got mentored by Favreau. It was a perfect working dynamic. The idea of the show is that it would help bridge the gap between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy, something that made a lot of sense to fans considering the 30-year gap between trilogies and the lack of explaining that the sequels chose to do. And considering Filoni's prior experience bridging the gap between major narrative events, it was only a matter of time before this was done anyway. The character that we would follow was a mysterious character simply referred to as the Mandalorian, a rugged bounty hunter working to survive in a lawless galaxy a few years after the defeat of the Galactic Empire. The show promised to be dirty and smaller scale, taking the focus away from the Jedi and the Sith and showing what the rest of the galaxy looks like in a time of Imperial remnants and political turmoil, while also paying homage to the westerns and samurai films that inspired Lucas originally. Production was announced in October of 2018, along with an official announcement of the first season's directors, those being Deborah Chow, Rick Famuyiwa, Bryce Dallas Howard, and it was confirmed that Dave Filoni would be stepping into the director's chair for the show's first episode. The first official image of the show gave fans a first look at the character, a rugged, masked bounty hunter traversing a desert setting. The image highlighted both new and familiar elements of Star Wars, and the mystery surrounding this character and the section of the galaxy he was going to be living in immediately hooked audiences. To top it all off, Jon Favreau gave fans a promise. This show was its own thing. People who had never seen Star Wars could watch this show and get the same enjoyment as someone who had been watching this franchise from the very beginning. In December of that same year, the main cast was announced. Though the characters were not officially named at the time, Pedro Pascal was playing the main lead, Gina Carano was set to play a former rebel shock trooper named Cara Dune, Nick Nolte would play the lovable Ugnaught Queel, Carl Weathers was Grief Karga, leader of the Bounty Hunters Guild on a planet named Navarro, Werner Herzog would play the Mandalorian's client, and Giancarlo Esposito was playing the series' main villain, former Imperial Moff Gideon. The series was shot at the same time as The Rise of Skywalker, and while Lucasfilm was primarily focused on finishing up the Skywalker saga, The Mandalorian was able to shoot without delays, production woes, or setbacks of any kind. There was so much confidence in the series, in fact, that before Season 1 had even released, Jon Favreau confirmed that Season 2 was in the early stages of development. And on August 3rd, 2019, with the launch of Disney Plus and the release of The Rise of Skywalker just a few months away, Disney and Lucasfilm were finally ready to show the world the show they had been working on. The first teaser for The Mandalorian might just be my favorite Star Wars trailer of all time. It opens with a shot of stormtroopers' heads on spikes, immediately letting people know this would be something different. And as the trailer's very un-Star Wars-like music swelled, we got gorgeous shots of the new ship flying over scenic landscapes that just didn't seem possible on television. Quick glances at all the main characters and only a few seconds of action, culminating in our main character doing this. The Mandalorian himself did not utter a single word in the trailer, but it didn't matter. The world was in. Disney had their hit show. There were more trailers and special looks and toy reveals and all sorts of marketing, but it didn't matter. The fandom had already been won over, and before a single episode of the show was released, Favreau and Filoni were heralded as the saviors of Star Wars. In a year consisting of the end of the sequel trilogy and the start of a new AAA game franchise, The Mandalorian was the thing that people were excited for. On November 12th, 2019, the launch day for Disney Plus, it crashed. People who tried to watch The Mandalorian were greeted with error messages, never-ending loading screens, and there were thousands of crash reports. The people who were able to watch The Mandalorian at launch, or just waited a couple hours like me for everything to die down, bore witness to some of the best Star Wars in years. The script was compelling and Filoni's direction was impressive for a first-time outing. It only took 40 minutes for fans to fall in love with the mysterious main character, his allies, and his enemies. Fans were impressed by the acting of Pedro Pascal and the doubles Brendan Wayne and Lateef Crowder, who were sadly not given their proper appreciation until Season 3. Without ever removing the helmet and speaking very little, the actors were able to show every emotion on the character's face and create one of the most recognizable silhouettes in Star Wars in just a few scenes. His ship and his weapons were instantly iconic, with the Razor Crest arguably becoming just as recognizable as the Millennium Falcon, and after one of the most entertaining action sequences in a Star Wars project in years, the episode ended on a cliffhanger that they had managed to keep secret throughout all of production, one that broke the internet and left fans yearning for more. In a couple seconds, Baby Yoda became the single most talked about thing in the world, and The Mandalorian was the most exciting show on television. Season 1 received unanimously positive reviews, with most people giving it scores in the range of 8 to 10, and the show became an event. Every week people would gather around to watch it. It was the next hit show. The show took more of an anthology approach. It maintained a clear start and finish for the journey, but every week viewers got to watch the lovable protagonist embark on a new adventure. It truly was about a bounty hunter simply taking jobs and surviving in the galaxy. The following episodes managed to maintain the excitement of the premiere. The mystery of who our main character was slowly unraveled, revealing a child who was saved by a faction of Mandalorians known as Death Watch during a separatist siege, and a character who might, for the first time, care about his bounty. See, in the show's second episode, the Mandalorian has to retrieve a Mudhorn egg in exchange for the parts of his ship stolen by Jawas. While Mando is great in fights he can control thanks to his equipment and indestructible armor, in situations like this he struggles a lot more. But for once, this character has some backup. Because this baby might not just be any baby. This baby is extremely gifted in a little thing known as the Force. And after our hero delivers the bounty and gets himself a shiny new outfit, he gets back in his ship, the Razor Crest, and freezes. The little ball the baby was playing with made him realize something. He actually cares. So the Mandalorian raids the building, steals the kid back, fights his way through the town, gets cornered, and just as all hope seems lost, the Mandalorians who have been hiding underground this entire time come to his aid, and Mando escapes with the child. Episode 3 is still my favorite of Season 1. The episode has it all. A compelling story, amazing action, emotions, and the promise of a fun season to follow. To me, it's the episode where the show truly starts. Episodes 1 and 2 serve more as a prologue. Episode 3 is where this show kicks off. Because this is not a show about a lone bounty hunter surviving in a lawless galaxy. This is a show about a man learning to love and survive, not just for himself, but for this creature he knows nothing about. Episodes 4 through 6 feel like a proper anthology. In episode 4, Mando lands on a backwater planet, meets another gun for hire, and they stumble across a town being attacked by raiders with a zombie ATST. The episode is just the Seventh Samurai, and I love it. Not to mention, we get to see hints of Mando's inner desire to settle down and retire, the little tease of him taking his helmet off, we get to see the baby be cute, and then in typical Mandalorian fashion, we get a pretty stressful ending. Episode 5 sees Mando land in the sands of Tatooine, visit a very empty Mos Eisley cantina, meet a wannabe bounty hunter, watch the two of them go after a sharpshooter played by Agent May, and then Mando flies off. But the episode doesn't end without a tease that someone is coming for this girl. Someone who will sound very familiar to die-hard Star Wars fans. Though I'm gonna be honest, Episode 5 is the only episode of Season 1 that I'm not a fan of. It's the only episode where I don't personally love the visuals, I don't love Mando's companion character, and it's the only episode that feels more focused on fan service than the actual story that's unfolding. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it's the only episode not written by Jon Favreau. This episode was written by Dave Filoni, and while I don't think the fan service is crazy here, I do think there's a disconnect between the way Star Wars iconography is presented in this episode versus the way it's presented in the other 7. But this is something I'm actually going to talk more about with later seasons of this show. Episode 6 was always a delight to me. I remember when I first read that people weren't huge fans of this episode because I get such a kick out of it. It's one of my favorites to watch. Mando teams up with Bill Burr, who's in this show solely because Favreau thought it would be funny if the guy who famously hates Star Wars was in Star Wars. Tonks is here, Clancy Brown is playing yet another Star Wars character, and they've got that dude from Batman Begins that Batman says this to.
Where were the other drugs going?
And they are tasked with boarding a New Republic prison ship and freeing a prisoner. Obviously Mando is double-crossed and he has to take them all down, and oh my god, it's Matt Lanner. There are a bunch of cameos in this episode. Rick Famuyiwa, Deborah Chow, and Dave Filoni all play New Republic fighter pilots who respond to the distress call, and it's really fun. But Matt Lanner specifically is the cameo I like. I know this episode gets some criticism, mainly because the baby doesn't get to do anything, and the other characters aren't likable, but that just made me so much more excited when the Mandalorian took them all down. Episode 7 brought the crew back to Navarro, the main planet in this show, because Mando's escape in Episode 3 left a lot of destruction in its wake. All the fun characters return. Cara Dune, Greef Karga, Queel, and the lovable assassin droid IG-11 all come back to play this episode. Baby Yoda force heals Apollo Creed so that they can ease audiences into that plot point in The Rise of Skywalker. Yes, that is the actual reason it's in the show. It was a corporate mandate so that audiences would see force healing before The Rise of Skywalker. And we got what was, up to that point, the coolest ending in an episode of this show. There was a character completely absent from the rest of the show. A character who was in the marketing and in the trailers, that being the actual main villain of the series. In just a few moments, everything becomes hopeless. The heroes are cornered, surrounded by death troopers and stormtroopers, the baby's in enemy custody, a fan-favorite character has died, and our villain has the coldest entrance since Darth Vader.
You have something I want. You may think you have some idea what you're in possession of, but you do not. In a few moments, it will be mine. It means more to me than you will ever know.
Moff Gideon was instantly iconic, and for most people, including myself, the finale of The Mandalorian had far more hype around it than the ending of the Skywalker saga. But they did run into a problem with the ending of this episode. At roughly $15 million per episode for a total of $120 million for the whole season, the show was considered expensive, but it still wasn't enough money for everything they wanted to do. A lot of the money went into developing the technology, leaving less for the actual show to use. So they did not have the money to build the amount of stormtrooper costumes that they wanted for Moff Gideon's arrival. So Favreau and Filoni made a brilliant decision. They called the 501st Legion. Not the 501st Legion that Captain Rex leads, the fan group known as the 501st Legion. They put out a call asking if they could get people to be in the show as stormtroopers. Fans showed up in their homemade armor that looked just as screen accurate as any. They knew the walk, they knew the calls, they knew how to hold their blasters, and thanks to that group, Favreau and Filoni were able to have the number of troopers they wanted, and the episode turned out great. But the show had one final and its biggest hurdle to overcome. Could they nail the finale? Just 7 days after the very negatively received Rise of Skywalker, this show was the center of everyone's attention. The episode couldn't just be good, it had to be great. And oh boy was it. The finale received unanimous praise, with people highlighting Taika Waititi's great direction and the perfect payoffs to the season's plot points. The Mandalorian, revealed to be named Din Djarin, was given not one, but two payoffs, with him finally learning to trust a droid and put his life in one's hands, and finally giving audiences a glimpse of his face. I have always loved that they went the route of just making him look like normal Pedro Pascal. Baby Yoda got a hero moment using the Force to save Din and Cara, IG-11 got a noble sacrifice, and Din finally got a jetpack, paying off a gag from earlier in the season that he used to go defeat Moff Gideon with, and then he flew off into the sunset with his adopted son. But it didn't end there. Moff Gideon survived and revealed that he has a special weapon, the Darksaber. A special type of lightsaber that longtime Star Wars fans would recognize and new viewers would be keen to learn more about. It was a near-perfect season of television and one of my favorites in recent years. It is so enjoyable and rewatchable and managed to carve its own identity into the very vast Star Wars galaxy. Considering how poorly the sequel trilogy ultimately played out, it was cool to have a new Star Wars thing that was exciting, featuring characters that people cared about. No legacy characters, no tie-ins, no homework. Just a bounty hunter and his child doing jobs across the galaxy. It was brilliant. The scripts were tight, the directing was top-notch, the performances were stellar across the board, the volume was a great new piece of tech that had so many possibilities. Ludwig Göransson's music was a standout, citing the main theme as one of the greatest pieces of Star Wars music of all time. Everyone was happy with this season. Star Wars was back. The hype for Mandalorian Season 2 was off the charts. Everyone was dying to see more, and luckily they wouldn't have to wait very long. Jon Favreau confirmed in July 2019 that writing on Season 2 had begun, and in October, before Season 1 even aired, they went into production. This time around, Jon Favreau would only write 6 episodes, Dave Filoni would once again write one, and Rick Famuyiwa was set to join the writing team this time around with the script for Episode 7. Season 2 also had new directors joining the team. Dave Filoni, Bryce Dallas Howard, and Rick Famuyiwa were all set to return as directors, but some new people were joining the team as well. Greef Karga himself, Carl Weathers, got to direct an episode. Ant-Man director Peyton Reed was brought in to direct the finale, and Robert Rodriguez announced on May 4th, 2020 that he had had the honor of directing one of the episodes. The team was rounded out by Jon Favreau himself, who did not get to direct any of the first season and was stepping in to helm the premiere for Season 2. Much like the first season of the show, Season 2's production was smooth and went off without a hitch, wrapping in 2020. They got lucky with their schedule because just a few days after finishing principal photography, the world shut down. As the pandemic raged on, Favreau and crew were able to work on Season 2 remotely, still determined to meet their 2020 release date. While the overall plot of Season 2 was just as mysterious as it was the first time around, the build-up to its release was not without its challenges this time around. Leaks ran rampant, claiming that Season 2 would see the return of several fan-favorite Star Wars characters. People were certain that Boba Fett would make an appearance this season, confirming that he didn't die in Return of the Jedi. There were reports that Clone Wars characters Bo-Katan and Ahsoka Tano would make their live-action debut, with many speculating that the latter would appear in Dave Filoni's episode. And characters like Cobb Vanth, played by Timothy Olyphant, were all but confirmed to appear. Were these leaks intentional on Disney's part? Almost certainly, but it didn't matter. All it did was fuel fans' excitement for Season 2. A month and a half before its release, the trailer finally dropped, confirming that they would in fact make their October 30th, 2020 release date. The trailer was remarkable, showcasing the season's much bigger scale. A damaged Razor Crest, bigger set pieces like dogfights and speeder bike chases, completely new biomes, and the child's expanded role into a proper character. The trailer gave fans a hint of what the season would be about, centered on Din's new mission of finding a mysterious order called the Jedi, longtime enemy of the Mandalorians, so that the child could be with its own kind. The anticipation for Season 2 was already there because of the hype coming from Season 1, but it was helped in part by the fact that people were still stuck at home and eager for something new to watch and talk about. The show could not have released at a perfect time. A release near the holidays when people had nothing to do sounds like the exact time that people would want to watch it, and it's crazy to think that that was entirely by coincidence. I remember the night the premiere aired. I feel like people couldn't stop talking about the fact that it was back. We had waited an entire year and it was finally here, and it was promising to be bigger and better than the already fantastic first season. My dad and I made pizza, fired up the episode, and were immediately back. Jon Favreau directed the premiere, and it only took a few minutes to remember why this show was so good in the first place. Mando goes to some illegal fighting ring run by John Leguizamo, gets threatened, and then cleans the entire place out, leaving him on a light pole for a bunch of creatures of the night to come claim. This was the stuff that made Din Djarin so cool, and they gave it to us immediately. After the cold open, the bulk of the first episode centers around Din catching wind that there's a Mandalorian on Tatooine that can help him reunite the baby with the Jedi. But upon arriving in the tiny town of Mos Pelgo, Din doesn't find a Mandalorian. Just a marshal named Cobb Vanth, played by Timothy Olyphant, wearing the damaged armor of Boba Fett. Din, offended by an imposter wearing the armor, made a deal with Cobb that if Din helped him slay the nearby crate dragon, then he would give up the armor. Din, of course, agreed, and now it was time for a classic Mandalorian adventure. But not before the Sand People showed their honorable side, and we got a massive team-up. This episode is so good. I almost can't say what it is I love about it. I just think it's solid. I like Cobb Vanth a lot, and I wish he was in more of the show than he's in. I think his dynamic with Mando is great. I really like the part when Din lets himself get eaten and just destroys the thing from the inside. I like seeing the Tuskens do stuff. It's just a really fun episode. And to top it all off, this episode gives us a cliffhanger that, just like the first time around, got everyone talking. As Din rides through the sands of Tatooine, armor in tow, a man watches them from afar. Boba Fett had returned. The premiere drew a larger audience than the Season 1 premiere, and fans were eager to see the payoff to the setups of this season. Boba Fett and Din Djarin were set to meet at some point. Baby Yoda was inevitably going to meet up with a Jedi, and there were so many questions people were eager to see answered. But the biggest question by far was when characters like Ahsoka Tano or Bo-Katan would show up. Then Episode 2 happened. Would I say that I hate Episode 2? No, but I wouldn't say I like it either. The only part of the episode that really matters is the opening dogfight. What follows is a really weird and sort of uncomfortable side quest. On their way to their next stop, Din picks up a frog lady who needs to be dropped off where her husband is. She is also carrying a pot of eggs that need to be fertilized. But of course, it can't be that simple. While he works to fix up the ship, he notices that the child is eating the frog lady's eggs, and this is something that is played for laughs. I personally did not consider this to be funny at all. It was really gross and sort of uncomfortable because all three characters in this episode are fully aware of what this lady's goal is, and none of them take this seriously. Baby Yoda is hungry and thinks it's funny. Din acts like what he's doing is just a minor inconvenience, and the frog lady doesn't seem all that upset about the fact that her entire livelihood is being treated like a box of Cheez-Its. And the actual plotline of the episode isn't great either, in my opinion. It centers around Mando having to fight off a bunch of spiders that keep attacking the Razor Crest, and then at the very end the New Republic fighters come back, save Din, let him go, and then Din has to vacuum seal a cockpit because the ship is too damaged to seal up naturally. It was always a weird episode to me, and it's the only episode of the season that doesn't do much to move the plot forward. It introduces zero important characters, doesn't move Din's mission forward at all, and then I'm forced to watch spiders crawl all over everything while this poor lady's eggs get devoured like a box of Oreos. It's an episode that doesn't really do much besides fill the 8-episode quota. But episode 3 eliminates all the doubts I had after episode 2. Bryce Dallas Howard returned to direct this episode, and it was the episode that had Star Wars fans itching for her to get her own film one day. The episode opens with an Apollo 13 reference in honor of her father Ron Howard, which is fun, and this episode sees the live-action debut of Bo-Katan and sends her and Din on a really fun mission to take down an Imperial cruiser. Season 2 adds a really interesting character trait to Din, and that is his refusal to accept anyone who doesn't approach Mandalorian culture the same way as he does, and Bo-Katan is a perfect character to oppose that mindset. It puts the two at odds throughout much of the episode, but ultimately they accept that the other person is just as much the Mandalorian as them. Though yes, I need to mention, Katie Sackhoff's wig doesn't look great. It's strange considering how good everything else in this show generally looks, but they couldn't get a wig right. Her hair looks fine in season 3, and that's a wig, so I know they had the money to get a good one. Not sure what happened here, but at least they fixed their mistake later on. I remember when I first watched this episode, and I was a little bummed that she didn't stick with him because they were so great together. The fight on the ship is cool. I like that Titus Welliver gets to cameo because I love whenever he just randomly pops up and stuff, plays a massive dickhead, and then dies. But this episode is most notable for two things. The first of those being that Bo-Katan is here on a mission of her own. She's not here simply to take down some Imperials. No, these Imperials might know the location of something she wants. Star Wars fans may remember in Rebels that Bo-Katan had the Darksaber, yet in this show, she does not. Well, she lost it at some point, and she's determined to get it back, meaning that Moff Gideon is now the enemy of 2 Mandalorians. But the coolest reveal is that Bo gives Din the location of where he should go.
Take the Foundling to the city of Caladan on the forest planet of Corvus. There you will find Ahsoka Tano.
Bo-Katan saying that name sent the fandom into a frenzy. That one name drop had me more invested in this franchise than anything I had seen in Star Wars in years. To this day, The Clone Wars is my favorite television series of all time, and seeing my favorite character make the cross into live action made me giddy. Maybe too giddy. Episode 4 is a great episode, but it's like the craziest case of blue balls right after being told he was gonna go find Ahsoka next. Episode 4 saw the return of some familiar faces. Din stopped on Navarro to have the Razor Crest repaired, and while it was in the shop, he teamed up with Greef Karga and Cara Dune to take down an old Imperial outpost. If I had to name a single episode of this show that flexed the higher budget they had for season 2, this is the episode I would name. Up until this point, the episodes primarily took place in wide open scenic areas or on ships that they could very easily turn into sets. This is the biggest episode yet. It takes place on the streets of Navarro, inside the Imperial outpost, and culminates in not one, but 2 action sequences. Also, Baby Yoda gets to be adorable. He goes to school and steals this guy's cookies. I'm a huge fan. Plus, him not being there helps this narrative so much. Din usually gets a babysitter when he's going on missions, but this is the first time where he's separated from the child, and the mission he is doing directly involves the child. During this mission, Din hears recordings from Dr. Pershing saying that the child has a high M count, meaning midi-chlorian count, and requests more samples from the child. He also finds vats of failed clone bodies, and with all that, Mando knows there's a threat. The final action sequence is spectacular. Speeder bikes follow Cara and Greef, and that blue dude from season 1 is here, but I didn't feel like he was significant enough of a character to mention. And TIE fighters come after them, but just as they're about to be shot down, Din flies in with the newly repaired Razor Crest. The child is safe, and he takes down the fighters. It's like the show briefly became a movie, knowing they had the budget to do some crazier stuff this season. It's so cool, and I love the reveal that Gideon and Pershing are still in play after their defeat in Season 1. And we knew Gideon was still in play because of the Season 1 cliffhanger, but it's nice to know that Dr. Pershing is still involved as well. Alright, I'm going to talk about episode 5 now. The Jedi is the title of Season 2's 5th episode, and to the surprise of no one, the episode written and directed by Dave Filoni was the one that brought Ahsoka Tano to live action. But unlike Katie Sackhoff, who played Bo-Katan in both animation and live action, Rosario Dawson took the reins of Ahsoka for her live action appearance, while Ashley Eckstein stuck to playing Ahsoka in animation. Because of how popular the character is, Rosario had big shoes to fill as Ahsoka, and the common consensus among audiences is that she knocked it out of the park. She got Ahsoka's mannerisms and way of speaking just right, and it truly felt like watching the character people had fallen in love with throughout the years. Here's the thing with episode 5. It is a contender for the best episode of the series. I wouldn't put it as my absolute favorite, which we'll get to pretty soon because it is in this season, but it's definitely up there. I was always impressed by Filoni's script for this episode. This would have been the easiest thing to turn into a fan service palooza, but I feel like he was very restrained here. The focus of the story was kept on Din and Grogu, whose name was finally revealed in this episode, with Ahsoka's presence in the episode serving as a way to propel their story forward. There are little hints and references to the larger Star Wars world, like mentions of Anakin Skywalker, Yoda, Morai, but those all make sense given the context of both the character and the story unfolding in this episode. The Thrawn reference is really the only part winking directly at fans because the casual viewer has no clue what is going on, and that was always intended to carry over into Ahsoka's spin-off show. You can also tell that Filoni was more comfortable directing live action at this point. Of the 3 episodes he had done up to now, this is the one with the most style and direction. The episode is gorgeous to look at, and the overall visual aesthetic makes the episode stand out against all the others. But what is the episode actually about? Din goes to Caladan, a city ruled by an oppressive magistrate, where he encounters Ahsoka Tano, who has been trying to get in and free the town. She teaches Grogu tiny little things about the Force so he can better hone his power, and in typical Mandalorian fashion, he helps Ahsoka in exchange for more information, and in this case he also gets rewarded with a pure Beskar spear for his troubles. The episode gives us a lightsaber fight, a Mexican standoff, that cool sequence where Din and Ahsoka clear out the town in complete silence, then aura farm like it's their job. Din does the coolest thing he's ever done.
Behind you!
The episode just makes me really happy. It's really cool. I have no notes. Except for one. I don't like Ahsoka's headpiece. I'm aware that they didn't have the engineering down yet and they needed to do stunts so they couldn't make her Leku huge, but was this seriously the best they could do? Never mind the fact that I can see the little fabric folds and it looks cheap. This is what they looked like the last time we saw her, and this is what they look like here. I get that they were working with what they had and they do manage to make them a bit bigger in her show, but I feel like they could have done something more. I don't see why they couldn't just make her Leku the actual size that they needed to be in post. And don't tell me it's not possible, because I know it is. Not only did they have the money, but Marvel had been giving Mantis CGI antennas for 3 years by this point. It was very doable. The other standout of this episode was Ludwig Göransson's score, most notably the track Ahsoka Lives, which is still one of my favorite pieces of Star Wars music ever. It starts out as a very upbeat version of the main Mandalorian theme, and it transitions into a somber and melancholy version of Ahsoka's theme when she gives Din the next steps and remarks,
And again, there aren't many Jedi left.
and then the theme builds into a more epic and triumphant version of the theme, signaling to fans that Ahsoka is truly back. It's gorgeous. Episode 6 gives fans yet another character they know and love. Din takes Grogu to Tython as Ahsoka instructed and puts him on the stone so Grogu can reach out to a Jedi. But right as Grogu begins this process, a ship arrives, the Slave One. Yeah, you know that armor Din has been lugging around all season? Boba wants it back. With Fennec Shand in tow. Wait, Fennec? Didn't she get shot in the gut last season and left for dead? Well, she's back. Boba figured out how to keep her alive. Whatever, at least bringing people back from the dead won't become a trend. And what ensues is John Wick Boba Fett edition, as he effortlessly tears through the waves of stormtroopers that come after them. Jon Favreau and Robert Rodriguez, who directed this episode, gave fans the Boba Fett they had been wanting since he was hit by a blind Han Solo in Return of the Jedi. Am I personally someone who needed Boba to survive the Sarlacc pit? No. Am I okay with it because I get to see a badass Boba team up with the character whose creation he inspired? Yeah, but the episode is titled The Tragedy, meaning there needs to be some sort of tragedy. Well, there's not just one tragedy, but two. Moff Gideon returns, and with a single blast he atomizes the Razor Crest and makes fans everywhere pissed off, and then sends his army of dark troopers to kidnap Grogu. Din has failed. But there is hope. For the first time, one of Mando's companions joins him on the adventure. Boba Fett shows his more honorable side and swears to assist Din to help get the child back. Armed with only his spear, Din boards the Slave One and the quest to reclaim his loved one begins. It was by this point in the season where The Mandalorian had viewers exactly where it wanted them. All people did between episodes was talk about this show, where the story was headed, the new characters, and what this giant quest would ultimately lead to. Coming off of this episode, there was one big question on people's minds though. Who did Grogu signal? Not since the build-up to The Force Awakens had the Star Wars fandom theorized like this. Everywhere you went, there were theories about who the Jedi was. Some people thought Ahsoka might come back and ultimately change her mind. Some people thought it would be Ezra. After the success of Jedi Fallen Order, a lot of people thought it might be Cal Kestis. Would it be someone completely new? Or did they actually go there and get Luke Skywalker? One of those is true, but through it all, one thing was for certain. This show was a damn masterpiece. Not since Game of Thrones had a show had the internet in a week-to-week chokehold quite like The Mandalorian. Everyone was watching it by this point, and even the people who weren't watching it knew what was happening in it. It was everywhere. The Mandalorian had successfully taken over the world, and the fandom had no reason to believe it would ever stumble. That's when my personal favorite episode of the entire series was released. Chapter 15, The Believer. When I think of perfect Star Wars television, there are a few that come to mind. The Phantom Apprentice from the 7th season of The Clone Wars, pretty much any episode from the back half of Andor Season 2, and The Believer from The Mandalorian. The premise of the episode is pretty simple. Din, Boba, and Fennec go save Bill Burr so that he can use his former Imperial training to get Din inside an Imperial base so that he can figure out where Gideon took Grogu. There are a few things worth noting in this episode. It is the first and only one without Grogu, and it is also the only episode that takes Din out of his armor. It changes up the status quo of how these episodes function, and it makes it all the better for it. Seeing Din go to such great lengths to save the child shows how much he has grown and what he's willing to do for the little guy. He even takes his helmet off, and by this point everyone should know why that's significant. Seeing Din take hits and struggle without his armor was a welcome sight. More Boba Fett is always welcome based on how well he performed in the previous episode. The Slave One got a piece of the action this time, gracing fans' ears with this sound for the first time in 18 years. And the episode ends with a callback to the first season, but this time instead of being afraid, you get hyped.
Moff Gideon, you have something I want. You may think you have some idea what you are in possession of, but you do not. Soon, he will be back with me. He means more to me than you will ever know.
But hands down, the best part of The Believer is the character of Miggs Mayfeld. A character who was more of a joke than anything in Season 1. A casting meta reference invented specifically to piss Mando off. But in one scene, this show turned him into one of the most well-written characters in Star Wars. Miggs and Helmetless Din encounter Miggs' commanding officer from when he was a sharpshooter for the Empire. And this officer talks about the glory of Operation Cinder. For anyone who played Battlefront 2, the 2017 one, not the original one, they will be familiar with Operation Cinder. It was a posthumous order given by Emperor Palpatine that involved the orbital bombardment of Imperial Allied systems in an attempt to punish the Empire's failure and remind the galaxy that the Empire was still in charge. It was yet another horrific act by Palpatine in his quest for absolute control, and Mayfeld was involved. He watched not only civilians die, but his friends and allies, the people he considered brothers. The operation led to Miggs abandoning the Empire, and the craziest part of the scene isn't how happy the officer is about the success of Operation Cinder, but how excited he is to do something worse. And that leaves Mayfeld only one option.
To the Empire.
40 minutes. So much happens. It's not just great Star Wars, but great television in general. I could do a TED Talk just on this one episode. Remember how I said that the premiere of the show crashed Disney+? Well, the premiere had nothing on the Season 2 finale. The desire to see Din confront Moff Gideon and see what Jedi is coming for Grogu overloaded Disney's servers. Me, however, the twist of this episode was spoiled for me by a YouTube notification when I woke up that morning. It wasn't even a channel I was subscribed to. It was just a recommended video I got notified about that had the spoiler in the title. Do you have any idea how messed up that is? This episode is a massive team-up. There are a lot of characters who have personal beef with Moff Gideon by this point, so Din goes and gets them. He has a team that consists of Boba Fett, Cara Dune, Fennec Shan, Bo-Katan, and Bo-Katan's little sidekick, Casca Reeves. I remembered that name. I didn't have to look that up. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. And then they just decide to go beat up Moff Gideon. Though I wish Boba actually got to participate in the assault. He's the catalyst for getting the ship inside, and then he leaves and doesn't show back up until the post-credit scene. I kind of wish I could have seen the three Mandos working together, but I'll settle for what I got because it was awesome. The siege of the ship is so good that there was a point in time where I forgot Din was the main character. When he heads off on his own and the episode just focuses on the four women clearing the ship by themselves, yeah, that was peak. But when this episode focuses on Din, it's a bit too good. Like, it has no reason to be that good. Din getting thrown around by the Dark Troopers is a great way to show how dangerous they are, and I like that for the first time in the series, he literally has no idea how he's gonna win the fight. But then he gets to Moff Gideon. The fight between the two is awesome, and it leads to what is, in my opinion, one of the greatest writing decisions in all of Star Wars. You see, Bo-Katan's only reason for being on this mission is because she wants to beat Moff Gideon so she can get the Darksaber. And you cannot truly wield the Darksaber and the respect that comes with it unless you win it in combat. So they give it to Din. He defeats Moff Gideon and shame walks him to the bridge of his own ship as the new owner of the Darksaber. What a direction to take both the character and the story. Anyway, that's followed up by one of the greatest things I've ever witnessed in my life. At the moment where neither the audience nor the characters have any idea how they're going to escape, an X-Wing shows up and a Jedi deals with the Dark Troopers. And before the X-Wing even touches down, you know it's Luke Skywalker. It is the most overwhelming scene I have ever seen in Star Wars. I do not think I blinked during the hallway fight. My entire family's jaws were on the floor. It could be considered by some to be the scene that saved Star Wars. The CGI on Luke's face isn't perfect, but the scene is so beautiful that I don't care. And I take no shame in saying that the final scene of the episode made me cry. Seeing Din and Grogu's goodbye was up until recently the most emotionally resonant scene in Star Wars since the original trilogy. Grogu looks at Din with a face that just says, "Thank you for everything," and Din takes off his helmet so Grogu could finally see his face. The only Mandalorian in this scene without a helmet on is the only one who swore to never take it off. And then the door closes and the credits roll. No happy ending. No flight into the sunset. Din did his job. He delivered a bounty. But at what cost? The finale of Season 2 managed to score a 9.8 on IMDb, putting it in the top 25 greatest episodes of television of all time. For me, Season 2 was always on par with, if not better than, the first season. With the exception of Episode 2, I always thought this season had a very focused story, with each episode getting Din and Grogu closer to their goal. And the cameos didn't bring this down, in my opinion. I know a lot of people disagree with that, but Bo-Katan makes sense to be here given the conflicting ideology she has with Mando. Ahsoka makes sense because we need a character that works to introduce the audience to the Jedi and get Din to his next objective. Boba is arguably the only one who's here for fan service, but I don't care because he's awesome and he forms an amazing brotherhood with Din. And obviously Luke needs to be here to pay off the entire show's story. Season 2 of The Mandalorian to me served as a perfect epilogue to Star Wars, and I really wish the show ended here. A glimpse into Luke's future rebuilding the Jedi was the best way to end the series, and the franchise for that matter. But The Mandalorian was too popular. The show broke the internet every single week. There was inevitably gonna be more. Din had the Darksaber, Grogu was gone, Season 3 had the freedom to go big and go bold. But first, there was a detour, and there was some behind-the-scenes drama. In February of 2020, Bob Iger stepped down as CEO of the Walt Disney Company and was replaced by Bob Chapek. The two of them had wildly different approaches to running the company, and Bob Chapek put out a content mandate, requiring Disney's largest brands like Marvel and Star Wars to have content ready for Disney Plus as quickly as possible. Spin-offs were greenlit, things went into production, and almost every week there was a new show from a major IP. In a Star Wars first, The Mandalorian Season 2 had a post-credit scene in which Boba Fett took over Jabba's palace, hyping up a new show called The Book of Boba Fett. And yes, we have to talk about it. The Book of Boba Fett should have been a slam dunk. It was the same guys who did The Mandalorian, and they were joined by Robert Rodriguez, who directed the Boba Fett episode of that show, and it was about everybody's favorite background character. It was basically more Mandalorian, but with the original Mandalorian. The general consensus of the Book of Boba Fett is that it was a disappointment that contributed greatly to the downfall of this IP. The first 4 episodes are generally regarded as boring filler that do nothing except make Boba Fett lame, though to be fair, the only 2 things he does in the original trilogy is chase the Millennium Falcon and die. They had a chance to make him not lame, and they failed. His Mandalorian episode was so good that the creators had the easiest layup of all time to make Boba the coolest character in Star Wars. Just do that for the whole show. The episode was like John Wick in the Star Wars universe. Everyone would have killed for a full season of that, and reading the comments on the trailer confirms that that's just what everyone was expecting it to be. The Book of Boba Fett can best be described as a crime show with no crime. Boba Fett serves as the mediator for trade disputes as he tries to protect his newfound family from rival syndicates. I think the idea of someone as ruthless as Boba becoming a protector is awesome. It's like the plot of The Mandalorian on steroids, but it never feels like that conflict is properly set up or paid off. It just sort of happens. Things in the show happen because it's what needs to happen next, not because they make sense. And the most talked about part of this show is why we have to discuss it in this video. Because Boba Fett is often referred to as a side character, or even a cameo character in his own series. And that is because halfway through the show, this happens.
I can bring you in warm, or I can bring you in cold.
So basically the structure of this show is as follows. Of the 7 episodes, the first 2 are primarily focused on flashbacks explaining how Boba Fett got from Return of the Jedi to here. Episodes 3 and 4 focus on Boba's recruitment and the growing tensions with the Pike Syndicate. Episodes 5 and 6 are standalone Mandalorian episodes, and then the final episode puts it all together. Except the finale is more centered on Mando and paying off his story than Boba Fett's, so ultimately this show consists of 4 completely unrelated filler episodes and then 3 episodes of The Mandalorian. In fact, if you skip the first 4 episodes and jump straight to episode 5, you miss literally nothing. So why did they do this? The common consensus is that this show was just going to be part of The Mandalorian and the actual Mando episodes were supposed to kick off season 3. But once the suits demanded content for Disney Plus, this show was Frankenstein together through existing scripts and ideas, and once they realized they didn't have enough of a story for a full show, Jon Favreau took already written Mandalorian scripts and slid them into the pile of Boba Fett scripts. It would explain why the Mando episodes are much better written, paced, and overall have more care than the actual episodes about Boba Fett. Now, my biggest issue with this is that it took the promise of The Mandalorian and scrapped it. The show that was designed to be easily accessible to everybody now required homework. A spin-off show about a legacy character that brought back characters from all eras of Star Wars was now essential viewing for the eventual 3rd season of The Mandalorian. It wasn't a particularly great look, and as we'll get into in a little bit, the effects of this are still being felt today. Episode 5 of the show is titled The Return of the Mandalorian, and, as the title suggests, brings back Din Djarin. He has fully thrown himself back into bounty hunting without Grogu, and can I just say, this episode is stunning. Shout out to Bryce Dallas Howard for this unbroken shot of Mando walking through the building, going up the elevator, walking into a meeting, collecting his payment, then walking away. That's awesome. The setting is awesome. And then Din meets up with the armorer and his longtime rival Paz Vizsla, where he trains to properly use the Darksaber. I love Darksaber lore, and this episode is full of it. Din sucks with this weapon. He cuts himself, the blade is too heavy, he has trouble swinging it. Can't wait to see how this plotline evolves. And after a duel with Jon Favreau, he voices Paz Vizsla, Mando gets exiled from his clan upon revealing he removed his helmet, and then he ventures to Tatooine to meet up with his old friend Peli Motto about a new ship. Not a new Razor Crest, but rather an old N1 starfighter that the two of them fix up and convert into his new ship. He runs the pod racing track and then gets approached by Fennec Shand, who tells him that Boba Fett could use some muscle. Din accepts payment free, returning the favor that Boba once did for him, but before he can answer the call, he has to make a stop to visit a friend. I really like this episode. It's one of my favorite episodes of The Mandalorian. It's the first time outside of the very first episode of Season 1 where we got to see Din on his own doing what he does best. But you can tell that he's softer now. He's gone through a lot. Here's a take I don't think the world is ready for. I do not like the N1. Yes, it's a cool ship. Yes, it's a fast ship. But Din is a bounty hunter. Where exactly is he supposed to put his bounty? But this episode is merely a prologue. It's a completely standalone story. It's episode 6 that actually furthers the story of The Mandalorian. From the Desert Comes a Stranger is the best name that any of these episodes have had. Favreau and Filoni both took final writer's credit on this one, marking the first time they wrote a script together, and where to begin. Not only is this yet another episode of The Mandalorian, not Boba Fett, but this is an insanely dense episode of television. Yes, let's get the elephant in the room out of the way first. Between episodes 5 and 6, Boba Fett has maybe 10 seconds of screen time and 0 dialogue in his show. And while I said this is an episode of The Mandalorian, it's worth noting that this episode is ultimately about everybody. And while I do enjoy it, this is the first time that I feel Filoni took the fan service a little too far. This one episode contains appearances from Din Djarin, Grogu, Cobb Vanth, Cad Bane, R2-D2, Ahsoka Tano, and Luke Skywalker. It's a bit much. Cad Bane and Cobb Vanth should definitely be in this episode. That actually connects to the story of the Book of Boba Fett. And either give us Luke training Grogu, or just give us Ahsoka. We do not need both. And on that note, here's something no one has ever talked about. Luke Skywalker is written insanely out of character in this episode. It actually bothers me when people complain about Luke's characterization in The Last Jedi, but take no issue with him in this episode. Luke defeated Vader purely because of personal attachments. His desire to save Han, his love for his sister, and his belief that his father wasn't beyond saving are core to his character. This line,
I am a Jedi, like my father before me,
isn't just referring to Luke being a Jedi, it's referring to his father, the man he's fighting for. The reason Luke is a perfect Jedi is because he follows their ideals without abiding by the flawed system they used to live by. So explain to me then, Why he tells Grogu that he won't train him if he has attachments. Attachments are the only reason Luke saved the galaxy. That's his whole deal. Also, I have to mention this. Does the CGI on Luke look better? Yes. But Disney, if you're going to keep using Luke, get an actual actor. The CGI face and the AI voice is not going to work. I can excuse it for both of his appearances thus far, but you gotta start putting an actual person on screen if you want this character to feel real. But for as fan servicey as this episode is, I can't say I don't like it. I like hearing Luke explain the Force to Grogu. I love Luke and Ahsoka's conversation.
So much like your father.
The standoff between Cobb Vanth and Cad Bane is awesome, and quite frankly, just the Cad Bane scene in general is awesome. He just quick shots Cobb and it's sick. It would be a shame if Cobb Vanth somehow survived this. That baby's adorable. I haven't mentioned it a single time in this video, and I really need to. Grogu is annoyingly adorable. Everything he does makes me emotional because he's so cute. It pisses me off how much I love this stupid puppet. The finale it's fun. The finale of the Book of Boba Fett suffers the same exact issues as the rest of the show. It's really dumb, but seeing Din and Boba pull off combo moves and defeat wave after wave of enemies makes just enough neurons fire in my brain to have a good time. Sure, Kersantin and the mods are there and the people of Freetown come to help, but why would I care about any of that when I see the two Mandalorians do this? And it really is just wave after wave of enemies. They fight against a bunch of foot soldiers, and then more foot soldiers, and then more foot soldiers, and then massive droids, and then Cad Bane, and then they have to deal with the Rancor. It's just a horde mode for 60 minutes. But this episode is perhaps most famous for its highly controversial way of handling major plot points. If you boil this episode down to the basics, there are two major character moments that have to happen. One for each of our main characters. Boba has to have a final showdown with Cad Bane, and Mando and Grogu have to reunite. To get the good one out of the way first, I am someone who actually really likes this show's handling of Cad Bane and his conflict with Boba Fett. He should have been in the show from the very beginning to properly establish this rivalry with Boba, which up to this point was entirely off screen, but their actual confrontation is cool. Bane thankfully wins the quick draw, and I like that Boba's gunslinger abilities aren't what defeats Bane. It's his Tusken abilities. It's a good enough payoff. I just hope they killed Cad Bane here. Please do not do yet another fake out death. But then there was the Mandalorian payoff. Instead of resolving this plotline in the main show, it is done in the finale of this spin-off show. Grogu chooses Mando over Luke and returns to his father, reuniting with him in the final battle and helping to win the day. The fight is actually ended not by Boba, not by Mando, but by Grogu, who calms the Rancor by himself. And if there was any question about who the show was actually about, the final scene of this entire series shows Mando and Grogu in their N1 making the jump to hyperspace to go do Season 3. Obviously, Mando and Grogu weren't going to reunite, but in the eyes of most, wrapping up this crucial plot point in a spin-off show was a strange writing decision that hurt the overall pacing of the main Mandalorian series and significantly hurt the impact of Season 2's finale. If you were to skip the Book of Boba Fett entirely, which is what I imagine most casual viewers do, you would see Grogu leave and then be with Mando one episode later. And while some people, including myself, don't tend to take issue with watching a spin-off to pick up on the full story, the notable quality drop between the main show and Boba Fett sours the taste even more. Not only do people have to do homework to understand the main storyline, but the homework isn't good. The Book of Boba Fett suffered much poorer reviews than its predecessors. Of the 5 main Star Wars shows released up to that point, the Book of Boba Fett stood as the only one that left fans underwhelmed. But unlike the Clone Wars and Rebels, which were complete stories regardless of if you watched anything else or not, the Book of Boba Fett was a chapter of a larger story still being told. meaning that its issues were much more apparent due to the impact they had on other aspects of the universe, like The Mandalorian. The show was criticized for its poor writing and direction, with Boba Fett spending the episodes either wandering through the desert or passively negotiating with mob bosses. The supporting cast was poorly received, most notably the Mos Espa Vespa gang, who stood out like a sore thumb against the dirty, sunny Tatooine backdrop. And overall, the show felt like it lacked overall direction or story, which is the main reason why people say you can skip to the 5th episode and miss nothing. On the opposite end of that spectrum, the Mandalorian episodes within this series were universally loved. Fans went crazy over episodes 5 and 6, but episode 7, as mentioned, was criticized for reuniting Mando and Grogu before a new season of The Mandalorian had even dropped. What this all meant is that The Mandalorian had an uphill battle. In December, after the conclusion of Season 2, Jon Favreau confirmed he was working on the show's 3rd season, and it would release after the Book of Boba Fett. With Season 3, the show would see massive crew overhauls, mixing series veterans with a lot of new people. Jon Favreau wrote all 8 scripts this time around, with Dave Filoni helping with episodes 4 and 7, and Noah Clore, a new writer for the series, assisting with episode 3. There were some major changes with the directing team for the season as well. Neither Jon Favreau nor Dave Filoni directed an episode of Season 3. Filoni was busy working on Ahsoka at the time, leading to him being relatively absent from the season, and Favreau chose to focus on the producing side instead. 3 directors, however, did return. Rick Famuyiwa stepped up to the plate for this season, directing 3 of the season's 8 episodes. Carl Weathers directed the season's 4th episode, and Bryce Dallas Howard directed episode 6. The final 3 episodes were directed by new people. Oscar-nominated cinematographer Rachel Morrison directed episode 2, Lee Isaac Chung, the director of Minari and most recently Twisters, did episode 3, and Peter Ramsey, best known for Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, directed episode 5. But those weren't the only crew changes. Baz Idoine, the series' main cinematographer, who was also instrumental in the creation of the volume, did not return for season 3, instead handing the reins to Book of Boba Fett cinematographer David Klein, along with Dean Cundy. In addition to all of that, series composer Ludwig Göransson had become too busy with projects like Black Panther Wakanda Forever and Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer and was unable to return. Joseph Shirley, a member of Göransson's team, took over music duties, but Ludwig's leitmotifs and themes would remain, with him ultimately getting a music credit for the season. In February 2021, after Book of Boba Fett had wrapped and fans were waiting for Mandalorian's 3rd season, Cara Dune actress Gina Carano was fired after a series of controversial social media posts. Her character was set to be written out of the show. But in 2020, as part of their Investor Day announcement, Kathleen Kennedy announced a show called Rangers of the New Republic, a show that was expected to be based around Cara Dune. After Carano's firing, the show was scrapped, with no scripts having ever been written. However, plot points would be recycled where they could, and The Mandalorian's 3rd season would include some of those plot threads. By the 3rd season's release, the amount of Star Wars content was overwhelming to most. More Bad Batch, Tales of the Jedi, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Andor had all dropped to various responses by the time the 3rd season released. But throughout all of it, people maintained their excitement for more of The Mandalorian. In May of 2022, Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni went to Star Wars Celebration Anaheim to hype up the show's 3rd season. They gave the audience all sorts of nuggets that it would be the best one yet. Bo-Katan would have a more expanded role, with her being at odds with Din over both his ownership of the Darksaber and his loyalty to a clan she doesn't believe in. There would be more Mandalorians in the season, better fleshing out their culture, and Grogu's storyline would run deeper this time around. But easily the most exciting tease was that the season would bring the characters to Mandalore. Despite the backlash to the Book of Boba Fett, fans were still very much excited for Season 3 and had every reason to be. Once that first teaser dropped in September, the rest of the world got their first look at what had been teased at Celebration. The standout moments of the trailer being the first official look at Mandalore, the N1 in action, and the other Mandos finally joining the fight. If people weren't sold by the incredible first teaser, a few months later a second trailer dropped which assured fans Season 3 would live up to the hype. The trailer highlighted Din's quest to Mandalore to redeem himself, the growing conflict with the New Republic and the Imperial remnants, and Grogu's past, which was particularly exciting to me. The trailer made one thing clear: this season was bringing the spectacle. For those who did tune into Season 3, they were greeted to a season premiere that seemed designed for audiences to play catch-up in the event they didn't watch the Book of Boba Fett. Mando shows up to his clan's new hideout and gets told once again by the armorer that he's no longer part of the clan. Mando goes to a now lively Navarro where Greef Karga serves as the audience surrogate, asking when and how Grogu got back with Mando. They wrote Cara Dune out by having her take a position with the New Republic, so Mando gets offered the Marshal job in her place. To many, the premiere was disappointing, and it's easy to see why. The episode doesn't really have a plot. It's just helping the audience along. The cold open is weaker than the other seasons too. I completely forgot how it opened, unlike the first two seasons which have lived rent-free in my head since they released. Instead of telling a full story, the episode focuses on setting up the two main ones for Season 3, those being Din's redemption and the Pirates, led by Gorian, Shard, and Vane, two characters that look awesome. They do bring Bo-Katan into the fold and set up some of her drama with Mando in a scene that I absolutely adore. The idea of Bo losing everything because she failed and being mad at Din and his cult purely because he's the one who got everything and not caring if he goes to Mandalore is sick. But it all leads to his actual mission, and I'm quite surprised that Disney didn't release the first two episodes of the season in one go, because episode 2 is where the story actually starts. Din stops on Tatooine so that he can get R5. Remember the astromech that Owen tried to buy but it exploded and that's why he got R2 instead? Yeah, that exact droid is owned by Pelimoto. Come on, do we have to include this random glup shitto of a droid? When people say the Star Wars universe has started to feel small, this is the kind of stuff they mean. Din could have just flown there, had his ship do a scan, say the air is breathable, and then they would have been fine. But to praise this episode for a second, Mandalore looks phenomenal. It's really sad to see all the iconography we recognize from the Clone Wars falling apart. The whole planet is dark and lifeless, and I'm not even going to wait to get this complaint out of the way. This season did not spend nearly enough time on this planet. Going to and retaking Mandalore was the promised plotline of this season, but they used this planet so little in the story. I think the episode itself is fine. There's more going on than there was in episode 1, and it's definitely more exciting, but the episode does suffer from some pretty bad pacing issues. R5 has no purpose beyond the initial scene. Mando and Grogu find where they're going insanely quickly after all the prep they had to do previously, and then Din gets attacked by a giant crab monster thing and he sends Grogu to go get Bo-Katan. And Grogu has R5 pilot the ship back to where she was, Grogu gets her, and then the two of them fly back to Mandalore and they go save Din, but while Grogu was on his side quest that took him off-world, Mando's situation didn't really change, and then Bo-Katan uses the Darksaber to save Din. A bunch of stuff happens very quickly in this episode, and considering how Bo immediately goes to save Din, I think it would have helped the overall pacing and story of this episode if she just went with him from the start. I understand her being mad at him, but I think there was some real potential for her to see her homeworld and remember her sister and everything she went through, and really hone in on how much she feels she failed her people. Bo going to her homeworld of her own volition would have been more powerful to me than her rushing over there to help someone she earlier refused to help. And then the episode ends with Din finding the pool and being pulled into the water. I know a lot of people give him crap for getting in with his armor on, but the point is that there should have been a bottom, and there wasn't, so I can't really fault him for this. Din's kind of an idiot. That has been shown time and time again. But that's besides the point. The point is that I think there is a reveal in this episode that is phenomenal. Because Bo goes down to save Din, and when she comes up, a giant eyeball opens. The Mythosaur. The long-thought extinct symbol of Mandalorian culture first tamed by Mandalore the Great. That is so cool. Overall, I think the episode's fun, but not as epic as it should be. I also think they could have done something to set up the overall twist of this season. It's revealed several episodes down the line that someone very important is hiding out on Mandalore, so the fact that they do nothing to tease that in the episode when they go to Mandalore is a little strange. But between these two episodes, the general consensus consensus was that the season had taken a step down. There was still a lot of the show to go, but 2 episodes in, Din had already bathed in the waters, and the way he got there was simultaneously too complicated and too rushed. With that, we get to what is easily my biggest hot take of the series. Episode 3 is good for the most part. The episode opens with a really cool ship fight, and that's actually something I think this whole season is good at. The flying sequences are breathtaking. You can tell they really put care into these moments since the show has always been very scarce with the dogfights. But after Din and Bo escape the ties, the episode completely shifts into a bottle episode about Dr. Pershing and what is effectively Operation Paperclip for the Star Wars universe, and this is one of the areas where plotlines from Rangers of the New Republic were recycled. Most people do not like this. I am in the minority. I think it is a very interesting story. I think it would have been more interesting if it went anywhere, but I enjoy it for what it is. Episode 3 is focused entirely on world building, specifically in relation to setting up the sequel trilogy. It shows the way the Empire began to sow the seeds for its return within the New Republic and established how flawed their system is. The episode gets some criticism for the way it makes the New Republic suffer the same issues as the Empire, but to be fair, that's not really this show's fault. It is canon that the New Republic failed for making the same mistakes as its predecessors, and the fact that characters like Mon Mothma and Leia were the ones that called that out in later material goes to show that the issue was with the system, not the people. So I'm fine with it, but if you would like to focus your blame the sequel trilogy for doing the same thing again, not this show for being forced to set it up a certain way. Speaking of Mon Mothma, this episode feels like Andor if it was made by people who think writing Andor is simple. It's Diet Andor. I do, however, have one major issue with this episode. That is, at the end of it, Bo-Katan takes the Kree to the Children of the Watch because she bathed in the waters. I'm not really sure why she's down to do it. I think the point they're trying to make is that Bo feels a sense of belonging in this group after her own abandoned her, though I'm not sure if my issue with that decision lies in this episode or its handling in later episodes. But overall, it's a solid episode. I wouldn't put it up against this show's best any day. I wouldn't even put it up against some of the show's typical side adventures like the Seven Samurai episode, but I like it. The 4th episode, however? Oh boy. By the time of episode 4, many fans had noticed that the episodes this season were weaker. It wasn't an occasional mistake. It had become a pattern. In episode 4, the Mandalorians are just hanging out and doing their thing. Grogu also gets to train a little bit in combat, still not talking about Grogu yet, and then things get crazy. So remember how the first episode had a giant monster attack the group? A new monster shows up and kidnaps a foundling who is just about to become an official Mandalorian, and in the episode they hint that this is a normal occurrence. Go literally anywhere else. And then the episode follows the rest of the Mandalorians getting the kids back, mainly Din Djarin, Bo-Katan, and Paz Vizsla. In terms of things I like, there's a couple things here character-wise I can really appreciate. I like seeing Bo hang out with this group of Mandalorians. She's the outlier, and it's cool seeing her react and interact with a group that she's not quite sold on. I like that Paz Vizsla gets a bigger stake in the plot, even if it's a side story. His beef with Din was always something I thought was cool, so seeing the two of them work together to save something so important to Paz, that being his son, is awesome. But execution-wise, this story is so boring. It never feels like there's any sense of danger. The Mandalorians act incredibly stupid. They've all got guns and flamethrowers, and Din has a lightsaber. This should be a conflict solved before the creature got back to its nest, but it took an entire episode. This could have easily been a cold open to establish these 3 Mandalorians working together, and it would have been sick, but an entire episode spent showing how tight this unit can be when they work together doesn't get the point across any more than it would have if it was just one scene. Many were also starting to pick up on the fact that the season was completely ditching what was believed to have been set up in previous seasons. It was a recurring idea that Din's people were crazy, and this season made them super chill, and Bo's people were actually the crazy ones. I don't hate the change, but it's not treated like the revelation that it should be. The good parts of this episode, however, follow Grogu, who I am still not talking about yet. But we get some Grogu flashbacks while the armor forges him a piece of armor, and I was so here for this flashback. It was the thing I was dying to see, and I feel like my excitement paid off. Grogu's defended by a group of Jedi during Order 66 who all get killed, but he's saved by Kelleran Beck, a Jedi who's played by none other than Ahmed Best. There have been 1,000 videos on why he was the perfect character to do this, so I can keep it short, but it felt like redemption for not the actor, but the fan base. For the people to show him how much they love him after all the hate he received for playing Jar Jar. It was beautiful, and the sequence was outstanding. It ends with Grogu and Kelleran getting off Coruscant. They do not explain why Grogu is so important. They do not explain how Grogu got to the planet he was on where Din found him. They do not explain why there were so many competing bounties. They do not explain what happened to Kelleran, and quite frankly, I don't want or need them to. My own headcanons are far more interesting than any explanation could ever be. It's just a bummer that the rest of the episode is such a letdown. Halfway through the season, and Din had resolved his personal plotline with no hint of a main story. In the first 2 seasons, it was always clear what was going on. Here it seemed very all over the place. Nothing was really being accomplished besides little side stories. Din had no stake in the story at this point. Grogu had no stake in the story at this point. The Darksaber plotline wasn't going anywhere. There was no main villain. By this point, myself and many fans alike felt this way. So how did episode 5 do when it came to winning people back? Well, I think it did fine. I am personally of the opinion that episode 5 should have been episode 2. The pirates and Mando were already on Navarro. Why have both parties leave just to come back several episodes later? The general consensus among viewers is that episode 5 was a step up. There was some action, there was a plot, there was a really cool villain, and it felt more like the first season where Mando would come to a town as a gunslinger, save it, and get on with his day. I like that. Once Din tries and fails to get the assistance of the New Republic, he enlists the help of Bo and his covert to free Navarro from its pirate occupation, High Zeb, and then the actual battle kicks off with what I would say is my favorite moment in the season, the Mandalorian airdrop. Seeing the other Mandos all unite and fight to take back Navarro with minimal effort is so cool, and I like that they pretty much all get a moment. The Armorer gets to take down the tower, Paz Vizsla gets to be the tank that he is, and even the random nameless guys get to do cool takedowns and stuff. I'm a huge fan. While they're doing that, Din and Bo take to the skies and we get some of that sweet N1 Starfighter action. And then at the end of it, the Armorer talks about the great mythosaur, and since Bo has seen it, she's allowed to remove her helmet to unite all the Mandalorians. What was the point of her taking the creed? Yes, I have problems with this episode. It runs into a lot of the same pacing issues as the rest of the season, but sometimes I want to enjoy something, and I really enjoy this one. Until the end. But episode 6 is perhaps the most famous of the season for all the wrong reasons. Being the episode directed by Bryce Dallas Howard, this was the episode fans were anticipating, seeing as her previous episodes were all hits. This episode brings our characters to a planet where Bo's old crew is hanging out. While there, they get roped into a side quest investigating a separatist sympathizer, and they fight an old super battle droid, and all sorts of hijinks ensue, starring Jack Black, Lizzo, and Christopher Lloyd. This show always loved celebrity cameos, but the difference here was noticeable immediately. While actors like Bill Burr or Nick Nolte or Sasha Banks were in the show, it always felt like they were cast as characters. The actors in episode 6 felt like they were in the episodes specifically so those actors could be in Star Wars. I love Jack Black, but the typical Jack Black performance sticks out like a sore thumb in this episode to the point that it completely took me out of it. He and Lizzo babysit Grogu in scenes meant exclusively for comic relief, and then this random planet knights him at the end, so that's cool, I guess, whatever. This episode takes a drop in quality visually as well, and it is very noticeable. But the single most famous part of the episode, and the most talked about part of this season, occurs in its final moments. Bo's people refuse to follow her, saying that she does not wield the Darksaber. So Din says, wait a minute, I lost the Darksaber to that giant crab robot 4 episodes ago, and then you beat the crab robot, meaning that you're the true owner of the Darksaber. And then he hands it to her, and everyone accepts her as the ruler of Mandalore.
No.
What?
No, don't do that!
Does it make sense? Yeah. Is it in character for Din Djarin to find a way to get rid of it? Yeah. But after the excellent setup of the Darksaber storyline, resolving it in this way at the end of a side quest episode felt like a betrayal. And episode 6 cemented the fanbase's thoughts on this show. It had completely lost its way. What had once been a carefully handled passion project that promised to reinvent Star Wars had fallen into the camp of milking its own success and checking the boxes. Mando had been sidelined in his own show. His plot with Grogu was resolved in a spin-off. He finished his personal quest in episode 2, and then he simply handed the Darksaber off. Grogu, who I think it's finally time to discuss, fared no better. His presence in the season had not yet and ultimately would not be justified. He had nothing to do besides be cute and sell more toys. His training with Luke was obvious by the fact that he had more mastery over the Force, but there was no point to any of it. The characters were never in a situation that required Grogu. He had no plot of his own and nothing going on, and once the decision was made to give Grogu more action sequences and have him move around more, the decision should have also been made to swap Grogu for a CGI double when necessary. But instead, this very obvious puppet just gets thrown in the air whenever Grogu has to jump, flip, or even press buttons. Fans had turned on Mando, Grogu, Bo-Katan, and the show as a whole. The Mandalorian had fallen. There were 2 episodes left. Would the retaking of Mandalore be handled well, or would it be another nail in the coffin of this once great series? The Moff Gideon reveal felt like franchise CPR. The plot finally started with the return of the series' main villain and hints about the larger story of the Mandoverse as a whole. The Imperial Remnant is convening in secret, planning their next moves, plotting to bring back Palpatine and awaiting the return of Grand Admiral Thrawn. And the fact that he's been hiding out on Mandalore is such a cool reveal that I once again wish had been teased in episode 2. Grogu gets a suit of armor in this episode, which weirdly works, even though it totally shouldn't. I don't like that they build a new body out of IG-11, but at least the droid isn't back to life, right? I like that Grogu finally gets to participate in the action and actually be a character. He isn't babysat this time. He isn't on the sidelines watching. He gets to actually participate. And the yes and no buttons are funnier than they have any right to be. And remember those vibes from the first 2 seasons? Yeah, this episode brings those back. The group going across Mandalore's broken surface is properly tense and ominous. And the episode just doesn't slow down. Din pledges his allegiance to Bo. The Mandos fight wave after wave of enemies. They deal with Dark Troopers, Jump Troopers, Gideon himself, and then it all ends with Mando getting captured and the heroic sacrifice of Paz Vizsla, a character I grew to really love over the course of the show. Episode 7 was really the first episode of Season 3 that had people talking. It was just a shame that it happened this late. Theories ran rampant. Who was the spy? Who are these other Mandalorians? What is Gideon planning? Why is the armorer acting strange? There were even some theories about if Din Djarin would die. Ultimately, none of the theories and questions would matter that much, but people were finally talking about the Mandalorian again, and they were dying for answers. To me, the finale is a good end to a bad season. The plot threads of the season are wrapped up nicely, and I dig the action for the most part. The episode is ultimately 3 battles that are constantly cut between. The fight with Gideon, the aerial battle, and the Grogu fight. That's right, Grogu finally gets an actual action sequence in this episode. The little guy rescues Din from Gideon in a nice reversal to the Season 2 finale, and then they find the room full of Gideon clones. His ultimate plan, much like many suspected, was to clone himself, and we later learn that he needed Grogu's DNA to give himself the Force. It definitely turns Gideon into a more cartoonish villain, but at this point, I don't care. I'm just along for the ride. But then the two get separated, with Mando coming face to face with Gideon while Grogu fights the Praetorian guards. Grogu finally putting his Jedi training to the test was something I was dying to see all season, and while it's awesome to see him finally get an actual fight scene, this fight is the biggest piece of evidence why using the puppet for action just does not work. It's very clunky and doesn't move naturally, and it really takes me out of every single fight. The main fight, on the other hand, is dope. I get that the choreo isn't the greatest, but I'm okay with it. Gideon continues to be a formidable foe, this time with Mandalorian armor of his own, and he puts up a great fight against the trio. Bo, being the wielder of the Darksaber, is the main one who fights him, and it culminates in the weapon's destruction. I like that the Darksaber's destroyed. I do not like how we got to that point, but in a season void of risk, it's nice that they committed to destroying the Darksaber. And in what is the ultimate culmination for viewers, Gideon's defeat is a massive team-up move. Din, Bo, and Grogu all get to participate, and then Grogu shields the two Mandalorians in a great callback to Season 1. But for the love of God, please let Gideon stay dead. He has been defeated in every single season, and he literally goes out in a blaze of glory. Let this be it. And for what it's worth, I think the endings all work. Din officially adopts Grogu, who now dons the name Din Grogu. Wait. You're telling me this man's name is Djarin? Din is a family name? His name is Djarin? And then Bo-Katan and the United Clans of Mandalore relight the Great Forge in a moment that would have been better had it properly been worked up to, but what we get is satisfying enough payoff for people who've been keeping up with the story from the beginning. Djarin comes to the realization that being a father now, he needs to change some things about the way he operates. So he heads to the New Republic outpost on Adelphi and accepts a position with them. Still a bounty hunter, but for a more noble cause, and this feels like the natural next step in his arc. And then the final scene of the entire series sees Greef Karga give the Mandalorian and Grogu a plot of land and... No, why is he back? Djarin sits out on the balcony with his feet up while his son plays with a frog. For a season so rough, it had a very wholesome ending. No post-credit scene, no lingering plot threads. Many people, myself included, assumed this was the end of the series. Mandalore's restored, Moff Gideon's dead, the Mandalorian has found a new life with his son. It makes sense as the ending. Obviously, this was not the end of the story, but before we can get to what came next, we have to talk more about what happened with Season 3. There's a post I saw on Twitter some time ago with the caption, "The Spectrum of the Mandalorian's Quality." And to me, that about sums it up. The first two seasons of the show were insanely strong, and they were followed by a third season that many felt was directionless and poorly paced, with bad exposition, corny dialogue, boring action, and no main story. And while pretty much every show has that one season that isn't quite up to par, the issue with The Mandalorian is that it wasn't just any show. It was a phenomenon. A bad season of The Mandalorian was more high profile than a bad season of a lot of other shows, and this killed all hype for the series. After major plot points were resolved in the Book of Boba Fett, Season 3 needed to be a slam dunk to win people over again, but it was another dud. And while I got into some of what made Season 3 fail before it even began, there are some more factors that I need to get into. One of those being Pedro Pascal. At the same time Season 3 was filming, another Pedro Pascal headline series was shooting its first season, but the difference is that only one of those shows needed to hide his face. Pedro Pascal was the main actor and main draw for HBO's adaptation of The Last of Us, a show in which Pedro appears in every episode. Because of this, Lucasfilm could not secure Pedro for Season 3, and Din Djarin's face could not be shown, though I feel they still could have done it, and I'll get to that in a moment. His three doubles, Brendan Wayne, Lateef Crowder, and Barry Lowen, who joined during season 2, did all of the on-camera work for this season, finally getting properly credited. Pedro only came in to do the voice. I imagine the original plan was to have him remove his helmet at some point, and that had to be rewritten, though I find it crazy they couldn't get Pedro Pascal for a single day. There are so many places they could have had him remove his helmet without it completely negating his redemption quest. Remember when Moff Gideon captured Mando and took him to be interrogated? Just have Gideon take his helmet off of him, and then he somehow puts it back on before Grogu rescues him. You would only need Pedro for like an hour, which I know is possible because there are 2 episodes of The Last of Us that he was barely in, and the fact that Gideon blows up seems like an easy way for them to resolve the issue of no one ever seeing his face. Part of why Mando showing his face needed to happen each season is because it got rid of the disconnect for the audience of who was under the helmet. In the first season, when it was revealed that it was Pedro, it leveled up the character because you finally knew who was under the mask. But in both season 3 and the Book of Boba Fett, when he never once removes it, the audience can tell that Pedro is not under there. The season overall suffered from Jon Favreau being handed horrible circumstances. His original plans were tossed into a spin-off show. He lost his writing partner, his lead actor, his cinematographer, his composer, had to use scrap plot lines, and wasn't given proper time to figure out how to make the whole thing work. The world had seen how good Favreau's writing could be, so season 3's quality drop definitely had more going on than Jon Favreau suddenly forgetting how to do his job. The show had also completely changed from its original pitch. It was no longer a fun Western samurai mashup that anyone could watch. It was essential viewing. It was homework. It had become the main story. But then it was all quiet. Loads of new Star Wars content came out, but there was no word on more Mandalorian. Many people just assumed that was the end based on how Season 3 ended. Until January 9th, 2024. The Mandalorian and Grogu was announced with Jon Favreau set to direct and Dave Filoni co-writing the script. Reactions to the news were all over the place. Some people were hyped, some were hesitant, some were outright upset. There was a time where everyone would have been interested, but that time had long passed. Pretty much everyone agreed the name sucked, but the biggest thing about the movie was that everyone assumed it would never get made. So many Star Wars movies were announced and cancelled in Kathleen Kennedy's tenure that it became a running joke. There was no way the movie was actually going to get made. The movie got made. Very quickly, in fact. In July of that same year, filming began and they wrapped in December. For the first time since The Rise of Skywalker, a Star Wars movie had been made. And while it would have been nice to say that this was a smooth process and everyone was excited, that simply was not the case. The Mandalorian and Grogu had a massive uphill battle. Season 3 was such a disappointment that people couldn't get excited for more no matter how hard they tried, and the assumption was made very quickly that the movie was just a reworked version of Season 4, similar to the way the Clone Wars movie was 4 episodes of television put together. This was later implied by Jon Favreau, who said the scripts for Season 4 were on his desk when he was asked to make a movie. He did later debunk this claim, saying the initial plan was to do Season 4, and he still hopes to one day, but once the decision was made to make a movie, he and Filoni wrote a new script from scratch. Just a few weeks into filming, Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni brought what they had of the movie to D23. They assured people that they didn't have much, but they wanted to stop by to give them a little taste. The footage shown confirmed the return of Zeb, and confirmed that Babu Frick's species, the Anzellans, would be in the film going on an adventure with Grogu. It seemed that the Razor Crest would be returning, and it was also confirmed that Sigourney Weaver had joined the cast as a New Republic X-Wing pilot. But it was several months later at Star Wars Celebration where they would really get a chance to show off the movie. The exclusive trailer kicks off with a one-shot fight scene in which Mando tears through an AT-AT, taking down everyone on board and destroying the massive walker. It was clear that Favreau was flexing his budget, able to pull off more impressive sequences than he was in the show, but the trailer didn't win people over on the movie at all. The most disappointing part of the trailer for many was the confirmation that The Mandalorian and Grogu was, in fact, not a placeholder title. It was strange when so many other titles were available. The Mandalorian. Star Wars has done this before, no one would be confused, it's not that difficult to figure out. The Mandalorians. Grogu is an official Mandalorian now, that was a whole thing in Season 3. This title would refer to both of them. The Mandalorian with a subtitle. Pick a subtitle that would apply to the plot of the film and put that in the name. Or my personal favorite, The Mandalorian, a Star Wars story. The trailer also confirmed the very sad fact that Djarin had gotten a new Razor Crest. It makes sense that the same type of ship would exist, but the issue for many, including myself, lied with the fact that he got one, period. With the return of the Razor Crest, every major decision from the series had been undone. IG-11 was back, Grogu was back, Mando's helmet was permanently on, he didn't have the Darksaber anymore, and now he has a Razor Crest. It felt like nothing mattered. Then all the theories and rumors started. What was this movie about? Who was in it? And it felt like the first time that rumors and leaks actually hurt a movie. Jabba's son, played by Jeremy Allen White, getting kidnapped, bounty hunters going after him, and a season of television converted into a movie had been done in Star Wars before, and it went horribly wrong. There was truth to at least one of those rumors, considering Rada the Hutt ended up having a very large role in the film. September 22nd, 2025, in the light of some drama Disney was keen to draw attention away from, they dropped the first trailer for The Mandalorian and Grogu, and people did not like it. The comments on the trailer are very telling, with most people pointing out that the movie seems like a long episode of the show and looks like it was made for TV, not an IMAX theater. And I wholeheartedly agree with this assessment. There is nothing in the 1.5-minute teaser that shows me why it had to be a movie. An AT-AT falling over is cool, but we did that 45 years ago, and big spectacle stuff like that happened in the show constantly. The Grogu puppet had no excuse to still be looking that noticeable. Again, switch it out for a double in action sequences. In a big budget, theatrically released film made by some of the most talented creatives in the world that they worked on for years, that should not be a difficult task to do. But if you go up to someone on the street who knows nothing about The Mandalorian, play the teaser for the movie and then the teaser for Season 1, ask them which one is the trailer for the theatrically released film, and I guarantee they will guess wrong. The trailer's abundance of Grogu also served as the final confirmation that Disney really wanted to put that character specifically in a movie. And the negative reception to the trailer was made even worse by the fact that the already disliked title had been made even uglier since its original announcement. A poster released on the same day that didn't catch nearly as much flack as the trailer. It's an homage to the old serials that inspired Star Wars, and I dig it. A lot of people take issue with the fact that Grogu's featured on the poster 3 times, but to be fair, so is Mando. And then there was radio silence for a while. Nothing was shown about the movie. Jon Favreau didn't even really talk about the movie. Kathleen Kennedy never really spoke about the movie. And once she left and Dave Filoni became president, even he avoided speaking about the movie that he is a writer and producer on. Both of them instead chose to highlight next year's film Starfighter. Did Disney have faith in The Mandalorian and Grogu? Did they actually care? Were they expecting it to flop so they just gave up? Or did they hit a panic button and realize they made a mistake? The answer is almost certainly all of the above. Fans not being at all excited about the first Star Wars film in almost 7 years is not a good sign, especially if you take into account that the last Star Wars film that got overwhelming praise from both critics and fans was Rogue One, meaning the last Star Wars film people were happy with was almost a full decade prior. But there were whispers on the wind. The Super Bowl was potentially going to have a Star Wars trailer. What a brilliant idea. The Super Bowl is the single biggest sporting event of the year. Putting a trailer for a Star Wars movie in that game would be a perfect way to say, we apologize for letting you down, here's a new look at our movie. The trailer would get millions of views on accident. People wouldn't even have to go out of their way to watch it. You know that episode of SpongeBob when Patchy thinks he found the lost episode, but it's just a walk cycle and he crashes out? That's what the Super Bowl trailer felt like. It was a Budweiser homage shot specifically for the game. No trailer announcement, no footage that would actually be in the movie. To me, it was just a reminder of how far The Mandalorian as an IP had fallen. How did it go from a show with some of the top episodes in the history of IMDb to a movie that not even Disney seemed to care about? Not even the toy reveals got people excited, and everyone loves toys. Alas, on February 17th, a new trailer released, marking the start of the film's marketing push. The second trailer was a big improvement over the first one. They actually showed off some big action set pieces, tons of spaceships, new environments we hadn't seen before, and overall just things that we weren't able to see on TV. Seeing that Din's helmet was going to be forcefully taken from him was something that I was particularly interested in. Sometime after that, the third and final trailer for the movie dropped, and it was then that I was finally sold on the movie. It was the first trailer that felt cinematic, but beyond the epic nature that the trailer attempted to convey, it was the first and only one that played into the dynamic and emotions between the titular characters. This trailer was far less about Grogu being cute and more about him working together with Din and learning to be self-sufficient. The trailers really wanted to play up the idea of Mando's mortality, that Grogu will outlive him by centuries, which is why Grogu's learning to be more independent. It was an idea I had wanted them to explore since Grogu's introduction, and knowing they would finally be diving into it made me really excited. We got some nuggets about the film's story and what to expect from it. Mando would be going on the hunt for Jabba's son and was going to cross paths with the twins from the Book of Boba Fett, who were going to pull his helmet off him for what looked like a substantial amount of time. Fan favorite Clone Wars character Embo would make his live-action debut as one of the film's villains, and Grogu was looking like a real character this time with his own side quest and allies. On May 22nd, 2026, The Mandalorian and Grogu released in theaters worldwide. Critic reviews were mixed, not ideal for the first Star Wars movie since The Rise of Skywalker, but managed to barely creep its way into a fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Unfortunately, the bad press and poor marketing of both this movie and the franchise as a whole did the movie no favors, leading to the worst opening for a live-action Star Wars film. If it weren't for the Clone Wars movie, it would be the worst opening for a Star Wars film in general. And I've seen the movie a few times, so let's discuss it. Spoiler warning, by the way. I thought the movie was dope. Though to preface, I am in no way a Star Wars hater. I actually like most of the stuff they have put out. The only Star Wars movies I do not like are Attack of the Clones, the Clone Wars movie, and The Rise of Skywalker.
I'm all the Jedi.
I'm sorry, I'm allergic to bullshit.
I feel like that's worth noting up front so that if you decide to call me a shill, we have already established that I am in fact a shill. I love Star Wars, and I try my hardest to find something to enjoy in every single thing they put out. On to the movie I'm supposed to be talking about. Someone's enjoyment of The Mandalorian and Grogu is directly related to their expectations going in. The movie is exactly what the trailers told us it would be. It's a more cinematic version of the TV show. It's self-contained, it doesn't care all about setting up the future or tying into anything else. It is a low-stakes, small-scale, isolated adventure. But this is both a blessing and a curse. I am someone who is very okay with having a Star Wars movie that isn't a huge epic. It's why I dug Solo so much. However, I can understand the criticism from many people that a theatrically released Star Wars adventure should not feel small scale, and in the grand scheme of the Star Wars universe, The Mandalorian and Grogu stands as the movie that has zero impact on the universe as a whole. The most common criticism going in and coming out of this movie is that it should have been an episode of a TV show and did not warrant being released theatrically. And while there are some very cinematic portions of the movie, namely the dragon snake fight or the third act when the X-Wings show up, I can very much understand this complaint. And to address the complaint that it feels like 3 episodes of a show put together, it's true. The Mandalorian and Grogu is one of the most atrociously paced movies I have ever seen. It's really strange because Jon Favreau has iterated multiple times that the movie was not repurposed from the season 4 scripts. He and Dave Filoni wrote a brand new script once the decision was made to make a movie. So why is it paced like multiple episodes of a show stitched together? The dialogue is also dreadful. I know Star Wars is no stranger to some absolutely horrendous dialogue, but the prequels have dialogue so bad it's funny. This movie did not have dialogue that was funny. Overall, the rest of the movie I liked. I thought the action was awesome. The dragon snake fight particularly was a standout for me. That whole sequence was awesome. I thought the opening was dope, especially the oneer through the walker. Embo popped off in the movie. His first scene when he captures Mando was a favorite of mine, as well as their final fight. It was cool seeing two equally matched bounty hunters go at it. Though I am in the minority in thinking that the Djarik fight is the single worst piece of action in the movie. The characters are fine. Rada the Hutt does not have a single good line of dialogue, and his voice is very jarring. I like that he doesn't speak Huttese. I think it makes a lot of sense for that character and where he's at, but the performance Jeremy Allen White chose to do was certainly something. That said, I actually enjoyed the character quite a lot. His story about not wanting to be his father was really interesting to me, but I would have preferred they not have him explain it 87 times. His bond with Grogu was absolutely adorable, and considering both of them live centuries, if this franchise ever gets bold enough to jump a few hundred years into the future, I'd love to see a grown-up Grogu and Rada that are still friends. Sigourney Weaver's in the movie. She's in a couple scenes, she gives exposition, and then she gets to sit in an X-Wing for like 9 seconds. Easiest paycheck of that woman's life. And there are so many villains in this movie. The Imperial at the start, Coin, the Hutts, and Embo. Personally, I thought both of the Imperials were incredibly lame. I know the guy at the start is meant to be a disposable villain so that Mando will look awesome, but he had no aura. And Coin was set up to be the movie's main villain and was far from being that. I thought he also ended up just being a wet fart of an antagonist. And that's why I greatly prefer the back half of the movie. I know the popular opinion is that the front half is better, but I respectfully disagree. The back half has better characters, better dialogue, cooler action, and far more creativity. Once Embo shows up, the movie completely levels up in my opinion. I think the twins are cooler villains, which is a crazy statement considering all they do is sit there, but they have some actual screen presence and are a genuine threat. Mando cheeses his way through the first hour of the movie, and then the Hutts become important to the plot and actually add some stakes to this. They also have Embo with them, and it's funny how they build up this rivalry with those two characters, but Embo only has one line of dialogue and doesn't show up until halfway through. Imagine if Embo was a constant issue from the beginning. It's not like it would have been that difficult. He's working with the Hutts, and the Hutts are helping the Empire. Why wouldn't the Hutts send Embo to the Imperials? Instead of Coin having that random red bodyguard dude, why not make that character Embo? Make him a constant threat. It would make his fight with Mando that much cooler than it already is. The back half also contains what is far and away the best part of the movie. For years I have been dying for Grogu to be more than a marketing scheme and to fully become his own character. Otherwise there was no point in taking him away from Luke. And that's why Grogu's plotline is without a shadow of a doubt the best part of this film. He got to show off how capable he was and utilize both his Mandalorian training and his Jedi training. The moment they gave him a suit-up scene and then cut to the shot of him on the Anzellan starship, I knew something special was about to happen. And the roughly 20-minute sequence where we follow Grogu as he babysits Mando was brilliant. It's what I've been wanting out of this character for years. It was creative, it was funny, it was heartwarming and emotional, and I'm so happy we finally got to see Grogu being capable. It's the first time I've gotten a sense that this is a character that could eventually be at the same level as Master Yoda. But the Grogu stuff also brings to light my biggest issue with the Mando stuff as a whole. There are about 5 minutes of this movie where we get to see Pedro Pascal's face, and the fact that he fights the dragon snake without his helmet on makes that situation so much more tense. And then it never gets that tense again, because he puts the helmet back on before the fight's even over, the Hutts die, and no one else ever sees his face. Not even Grogu, and Grogu is nursing him back to health. 3.5 seasons and a movie into this character, and I do not like that he still has the helmet on full time. At the end of season 2, him taking the helmet off meant something. It was so his son could see his face and they could share a tender moment. It is a decision Din makes that he fully stands by. But for some reason, the show chose to frame this as a mistake. Din was wrong for showing his face. He was weak for showing emotion or vulnerability. And then they had him redeem himself for a moment that didn't need redemption, and then he adopted Grogu, so now his own son doesn't get to see his face. And at the end, he becomes a father and leaves the other Mandalorians behind to go raise his kid, and he still follows the creed to a T. He doesn't take the helmet off. He doesn't even thank Grogu for saving his life. He just tells him, this is the way, and he moves on with his life. It feels like they're scared to have Mando go on a character arc, which he does not have in this movie, by the way. I think Mando should have been helmetless for like half the film. The Hutts talk about how priceless Beskar is, and then they give him the helmet back. He should lose that thing and not get it back. He should be helmetless when Grogu saves his life, he should be helmetless in the third act, and he should remain helmetless. If you really want him to get it back, then have him get it in the third act as the Hutts fall into the water. The helmet coming off him should mean something. Commit to removing it or don't remove it. Don't take it off him for 5 minutes and then have him put it back on before the fight's over so that you can swap in Lateef Crowder. I'm sick of it. But overall, I enjoyed the movie. I wasn't expecting much from it and I ended up liking it. For me, the ranking goes Season 2, Season 1, The Mandalorian and Grogu, Season 3. And if we want to count it, the Book of Boba Fett would be at the bottom. The legacy of The Mandalorian is a crazy one. Once it was regarded as the show that would save Star Wars. Its two creators were heralded as the people that resurrected the brand. The character was iconic and his adventures were legendary. It was a show that changed the world. It united fans, made us cheer, made us cry, and reminded us what the galaxy far, far away was. But then it all changed. The show became slop in the eyes of many. Filler, bland content, corporate trash, any negative slew of adjectives that you want to use. People turned on Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni. They got sick of the character. Grogu didn't work anymore. A show known for its high highs became more well known for its shockingly low lows. The Mandalorian and Grogu was the first Star Wars movie in almost 7 years, and no one cared. And now talks have resumed about potentially getting that 4th season Favreau keeps mentioning, and no one cares about that either. And it's hard to blame those people. Disney took one of the best things they had put out in a long time and milked it dry, completely destroying its reputation. But to me, The Mandalorian will always be one of my favorite pieces of Star Wars. At a time when I was mixed on the franchise, the show came into my life and reminded me how much I can love it. I adore the first 2 seasons of the show. They are so close to perfect, and even though I'm not a fan of Season 3, I can still find so much to cherish. And I think The Mandalorian and Grogu is some of the most fun I've had watching Star Wars in theaters. I have had a Mandalorian figure on my desk for years. I bought the popcorn bucket. I have so much merch of this character that I'm sure I'm one more purchase away from an intervention. Now the question needs to be asked. What is next for The Mandalorian? Season 4 was set to involve Grand Admiral Thrawn and help lead into Dave Filoni's giant film to culminate this storyline, but now that film is on the back burner. The Mandalorian and Grogu ended up serving as a filler arc that does nothing for the world or the characters. And in a year, the next Star Wars film, Starfighter, releases. It takes place after the sequel trilogy, is directed by Sean Levy, stars Ryan Gosling, Thomas Newman's composing it, and even Lucasfilm themselves have done more to hype up that film than the one that actually brought Star Wars back to the big screen. Next year marks the 50th anniversary of the original Star Wars film, and the movie that's getting the release slot for that milestone is Starfighter. Is The Mandalorian being forgotten? I have no idea. But I hope to see these characters again. I hope to see them in a new season. I hope to see them on the big screen again, teaming up with Ahsoka, Sabine, Ezra, Boba Fett, and Bo-Katan to fight Grand Admiral Thrawn. And I hope that they remain a key pillar of the Star Wars universe. I know the story hit some roadblocks and people don't care anymore, but I'm sick of stories not getting a chance to end. Because if this is it and we are moving on, then what has this whole era even been for?